So, with a rough release date on the horizon, I thought about how far we, the fans, and especially the studio behind the Gothic remake Alkimia has come. From that terrible playable teaser at the very beginning, to the Nairis demo, which was released around last year's Gamescom. And obviously it didn't end there. We got actually quite a lot of material to look at. Trailers, screenshots, and beautiful making-of episodes shining some light on the people behind the project, their mindset, their creative process, and their inspirations. But there was one line in the last episode of the making-of that made me very worried.
I think the style of the original games is fascinating and perfectly captures an era where the technical limitations force people to enhance their imagination and to come up with imaginary solutions and actually pretty smart solutions. However, as an artist, I think that the fact that most interest awakes in me is how they progressively change the aesthetics of the game from Gothic 1 to Gothic 2 to Gothic 3. I mean, it's like from Gothic 1 to Gothic 2, there's a clear shift in tone, in colors, and everything that the game is trying to visually convey. And at the same time, as I told you, I think that the aesthetic of the three games evolved with the time, and they started to take decisions to make everything more rounded and more realistic and more believable in terms of how animals should look and how environments should look and the proportions and everything. One of the most interesting parts is when you play Gothic 2 and you discover that all of this dark aesthetic just disappears as the barrier disappears, and now the game outside the colony, outside the barrier, is actually vibrant and full of life. And this changed the mood completely of the game. No? This evolution in the games, I think it's pretty smart for the age, and I think this is something that we should also try to respect at maximum.
One of the most interesting parts is when you play Gothic 2 and you discover that all of these dark aesthetics just disappear as the barrier disappears, and now the game outside the colony, outside the barrier, is actually vibrant and full of life. And this changes the mood of the game completely. This evolution in the games, I think, is pretty smart for the age, and I think it is something that we should all try to respect at maximum. This statement is very concerning to me. Gothic is a dark fantasy open-world action RPG, inspired by the likes of Diablo and also Tomb Raider. It was meant to be the opposite of high fantasy RPGs that dominated the time back in the day, having knights in shiny armor, a typical good versus evil sentiment, elves, dwarves, and fantastical magic. Gothic is grounded. It feels real. Its monsters are, for the most part, just regular animals when observed through the lens of suspension of disbelief. They have a hierarchy, hunt each other, and it just made the world feel alive, even without you being present or interfering. The societies, the camps, the culture, the hierarchies, the extortion of peasants by high-ranking military forces, all this is adding to the realism of the game. The dialogue is direct and stripped of any unnecessary meandering, no romanticized medieval clichés like "Thy king commands thee to slay that foul beast that hath plagued our kingdom." Gothic's NPCs talk like real people. The occult themes in Gothic are also a very big part of its identity. I did a whole video about this subject, I will link it at the end. Cults, weird magic that influences the psyche, the worshipping of idols and fetishes, strange mind-opening substances harvested from subterranean creatures, sacrifices, demons being summoned from a distant dimension, Lovecraftian inspirations, yes, all of those things shaped Gothic. The orcs, one of the antagonists in the game, are no brainless drones like in other media. They are not acting out of evilness. They had a tragic story on their own, calling upon a mighty entity to win a hopeless war, only to be enslaved by it. The plot was simple, but yet effective, and it unraveled naturally as the player progressed. Plot twists, dramatic scenes, heroic and tragic characters all made you witness a gripping story happening in front of you, like a grand adventure on the silver screen. And all of this laid the groundwork for the franchise, the frame in which the world was displayed, the umbrella under which the plot unfolded. The original Gothic created an identity under which the whole franchise should operate. In Gothic 2, things were about to change. While the first game was set in a penal mining colony full of convicts, we now venture into the more civilized part of the island of Corinus. Here the law of the king stands above all. Crimes are frowned upon. Upright citizens condemn everyone suspected to be a former convict of the Valley of Mines, and the Church of Innos plays a way bigger role. Ruthless guards turned into upstanding defenders of the realm. Weird cults are abandoned in favor of churches inspired by Christianity. Strange beasts like bloodhounds and biters are replaced with boars, and the diverse architecture was also gone. No more adobe-style houses inspired by the native people of America. No shacks in the style of the Amazonian people. No more massive black castles with sharp edges from a time period which acts as the namesake for the franchise. Instead, we get an architecture that is more or less homogeneous across the whole new land. The underground exploration has almost completely vanished, while it was a big part of the identity and atmosphere of Gothic 1. The abyssal depths and looming darkness, something that was carried over from dungeon crawlers of the old times, suddenly became more and more a thing of the past, with some few exceptions. The guilds became more standard too. Now arrogant knights in shiny armor and snobbish fire mages replaced the brutish guard of the old camp and the esoteric monks and warriors of the sect camp. Even the mercenaries, who cared only about the protection of the water mages in Gothic 1, are now upholders of law on Lobart's farm. Yes, there are still some aspects that can be deemed occult, like the Seekers, some very small interactions in Yarkandar, or tiny sections of Erderoth, but it's nowhere near the original. Even the bosses were a major step down in terms of uniqueness. While we fought an otherworldly and completely Lovecraftian demon summoned from another dimension and tethered to this world by the hearts of orcish shamans, the main antagonists of Gothic 2 are plain old talking dragons. From Lovecraft to Disney. You see, a change of scenery is good and welcomed, introducing different factions. Hell yeah, it's great. But it all needs to fit into the context. It needs to draw inspirations from the inception of the franchise, not cast it away. While Gothic 2 retained some of those characteristic aspects from its predecessor, Gothic 3 was a complete mess. The sheer size of the map made interactions with NPCs impersonal and unimportant, and even exploring, while it was admittedly one of the more exciting things in the game, became a chore. Since all of Midland looks the same, all of Varand feels the same, and Nordmar is a hell to traverse, it was more work than adventure. When listening to the dialogue, it feels like a crude imitation of those iconic lines of the past. It feels wooden and over the top at times, not fitting at all. The architecture was again completely new. Nothing resembled Gothic or even Gothic 2 anymore. To make my point very clear, I don't want the same visuals over and over again, but you need visual continuity to make you feel that you are still in the same universe. This evokes not just nostalgia, but also a sense of coherence, which is necessary for the world building, influencing atmosphere, and believability. Where did the builders of the new camp take their inspirations from? Where are those grand and imposing fortifications like the mountain fortress and the fortress of the old camp? Where's the black stone, the massive watchtowers, the dungeons? Aren't those supposed to be remnants of the first Orc Wars? Everything in Midland seems to have been built at the same time period. Is that believable? We know that the realm was once ruled by Roba I, and that might have been a completely different time period. Has the architecture never changed at all? Why is there no diversity among the human cities? How did the sect camp come up with their ideas for their housing? Did it just pop into their minds one day? Look, I'm not saying that we need the Brotherhood of the Sleeper on the mainland, not at all. But things like architecture is inspired by something the convicts might have seen back in their homelands, and yet it is devoid of anything similar. The biomes were also very limited, especially considering the size of the map. Mixed forests, deserts, and snowy mountains, that's all. An absolute downgrade. Where are the swamps and canyons of Varant? Where is the variation in Midland and Nordmar? Where are the deep underground locations? Where are the battlefields on which the human forces fought the orcs? Where are the siege weapons which they used in Gothic 2? Where is the orcish culture? What the hell even happened to the orcs? Are they the same race or something different? Why do they behave like humans? They sleep in beds, read books on desks, and wear clothes. You know, them occasionally lifting up big stones, playing the drums, or saying Mora is simply not enough to make me feel that these are the same creatures we encountered numerous times so far. Apart from all these things, they simply don't look like orcs. What did the developers think when they redesigned them? The orcs don't feel threatening at all. They don't feel alien and feral. Quite the opposite, actually. They are downright comical at times. And the biggest sacrilege of them all? The nameless hero who fought so valiantly against the green furs on Khorinis is now able to join them. This defeats the whole setup of the first 2 games. Why even bother fighting them back on Khorinis if we lick their boots in the end? Freedom of choice is a beautiful thing in an RPG, but not if the narrative suffers from it, and oh lord did it suffer. To abandon the guild system was another huge mistake. Joining a faction in the first 2 games was one of the highlights of a playthrough. New ways opened up because you now had access to better armor, spells or weapons. It was a great sense of progression, but it was replaced with an MMO-like reputation system in which percentages would determine your standing with a faction. On top, you would never truly feel like you are actually part of one of those forces in Metana. The story, one of the weakest aspects of the game, was a narrative mess and mainly consisted of hunting certain relics. It was, for the most part, one gigantic fetch quest. What an incredible disaster! While Gothic's story unfolded organically before our eyes, feeling like you are reading a book or watching a show, the second game already felt more video gamey with huge exposition dumps by an all-knowing narrator in the beginning. Then Gothic 3 wrecked it all. There are only 2 big story beats: find Gazardus and find the relics. I always felt that Gothic 3 was developed in such a way to grab the attention and to appeal to fans from all over the world, especially America. With games like Elder Scrolls dominating the market, Piranha Bytes felt the need to compete with those instead of catering to their true fans and continuing a formula that made Gothic such a classic. Look, I don't want to discredit the people who genuinely like Gothic 3. Maybe you grew up with this game. Hell, maybe it even was the first game you ever played, but you cannot deny it was a huge departure from the first 2 games. It might even be considered a decent game if it was a completely new franchise, but it bears the title Gothic, and with that, it crumbles beneath the weight of its legendary lineage. You see, Gothic 3 had great potential. Imagine a cult of Beliar in the desert, slowly but surely winning more and more common folk for their cause. Investigating the desert cities or ruins in Midland, coming across ritual sites in which human sacrifices were made for the Dark Lord, ominous gatherings of dark magicians deep in the ruins beneath the sands. Imagine the last battles between the remnants of the king and the Yorkish hordes, sabotaging their siege weapons at night before they can tear down the walls of the human cities. Imagine proper orc cities in the depths beneath the mountains of Nordmar, where their shamans burn incense, hold rituals, beast warrens in the dimly lit darkness, sacred places of eons past. I could go on and on. You see, I can criticize the game to infinity, but at the end of the day, there is only one thing that hindered them from delivering a truly worthy end to the epos that is Gothic: time. Piranha Bytes was pressured into releasing the game way too early, and we were left with broken promises, shallow gameplay, and a story that could never be a match for the legend that took place in the Valley of Mines. I heavily doubt that the gameplay and the lack of polish was the only thing that suffered from this lack of time. No, I think it affected all aspects of the game. Even the atmosphere, the themes, the story, and the world building. I bet that if they would have had more resources, Gothic 3 would have looked and felt drastically different. I ask you, could you deliver under heavy time constraints? Could you write a good story, let alone develop a game when you're all stressed out? These things take time. Time they didn't have. Alkimia, please rethink your attitude towards staying true to the franchise as it was released. This is now your, and to an extent our, last chance to bring the whole franchise in line and to fulfill the original vision the developers had back in the day. A grim and gloomy action RPG which is grounded and believable, with its roots in the dark fantasy of the 80s and Lovecraftian elements of unspeakable and undescribable horrors in its core. Gothic gradually lost these elements, and its uniqueness vanished in favor for a more bland and standard fantasy. This has been discussed ad nausea by fans over the last 2.5 decades on forums, video essays, and other media. Also, I know, as somewhat of an artist myself, that you want to leave your influence on the project you work on, and that is all fine, as long as it doesn't stand out like a sore thumb but fits right with the style and the atmosphere the original created. I do love Alkimia's approach of designing the lighting, for example. Their inspirations rooted in the dramatic Baroque art made by masters like Caravaggio and Velázquez. With stark contrasts, the light and darkness seem to fight around those shades of grey, the ever-looming sense of dread against valiant heroism. Dynamic emotions, illusions, and ominous imagery is what sets it apart from the rest, and I love it because it fits the world, lore, and atmosphere. Gothic 3, however, would be more of a colorful, more accessible Renaissance painting with smooth contrasts, a more joyful composition depicting bright and light-hearted scenes, blue skies, and an overall cheerful atmosphere. The shift in tone is too drastic, and Gothic 3's art style, or rather its implementation, its engine, textures, and overall graphics, but also its themes are way too far gone from the original. It feels detached and inconsistent. Maybe the reason for the shift was the limited amount of time. Maybe it was a deliberate choice, but either way, it was a decision for the worst. Most of what I have seen is great, and some redesigns, which in my opinion were really challenging, for example the Bloodhounds, Biters, and Lurkers, turned out to be really awesome. You see, the general roughness and realism of the camps, their overlords and their ambitions work on their own, but it's the surreal and occult counterpart that lies deep within that makes the atmosphere, the themes, and the style so special. I want to ask the question: do you really think it is a wise decision to hold an unfinished product in such high regard and make it a benchmark from which you draw inspiration from? I have no doubt that Alkimia is capable of working on the revival of one of the greatest RPGs ever made, hands down. They have the skills, the artists, the knowledge, and the motivation, but I really hope that they go back and take a good long look at what made the original game so special and what its successors so thoroughly lacked. We have seen countless franchises fall because of the writer's lack of understanding what the original made so special. Star Wars has become a husk of itself, and it's living proof that lightsabers and the Force alone are no guarantee for a good movie at all. The utter pathetic attempt at creating a show set in Tolkien's universe, spiked with social commentary to appease the shareholders and Californian demographic, is another bad example. Or take a look at what has become of The Witcher now that they have disposed of Geralt and a great actor that really had in-depth knowledge of lore and world building. There are countless lessons to be learned from these failures, and I simply don't want another great franchise to go down the drain. I want to apologize if all of this sounded too harsh or, God forbid, like an attack on you guys and gals at Alkimia. This is absolutely not the case, but I cannot deny that I get very passionate about these things. I don't want to sound too dramatic, but it's the love for the game that drives me, and it would pain me to see this opportunity squandered, an opportunity to create something very, very unique, something that stands out among the vast sea of mediocre RPGs. The IP on your hands has so much potential, and so have you. Be a shining beacon in the darkness that is the video game industry of today. Lead the way and dare to be different. With all that said, thank you dearly, and much, much, much love to the team. Vertigo out.